Please welcome the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Anas Sarwar.
Hello.
You all right? Andy? You all right?
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Good.
has John left his iPad?
Oh no, that's mine actually.
All right. Oh.
I'll log in and look at the questions.
I was going to say, Anas, that's gold.
It
Steady on now.
feels like political speed dating this, doesn't it?
It's marked private and confidential. Mr. Sarwar, thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
My absolute pleasure, thank you.
Very nice to see you. Actually, should we start there, John, when he's talking about voting? We're not keeping you from anything important, are we? You've got plans in
All
place
you're doing
to make it all work.
all you're doing is stopping me voting against the education bill, but it's fine.
I'm sure you'll be able to have your say on it throughout the course of this conversation.
Indeed.
We started with the First Minister. I think it's right that we start with you on geopolitical world events and where we kind of find ourselves in the context of geopolitical pressures. Of course, I'm referencing Iran, I'm referencing Israel, I'm referencing the US bombing of Iran at the weekend. It's difficult, I think, for us to understand what the Prime Minister thinks about this. The Labour Prime Minister, it seems he can't articulate whether he supports the action that President Trump took overnight Saturday to Sunday our time, or whether he opposes it. Are you clear on that?
I actually think the approach the Prime Minister's taken has been the right one, which is to try and keep diplomacy alive, to urge restraint, to make sure he has a strong dialogue with all sides of the dispute, and trying to stop it breaking out in a full regional war. And the reality is, we shouldn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That would be very dangerous for the region. It would be very dangerous for the world. We can worry about the risks that Benjamin Netanyahu poses to wider regional insecurity. I think there are some of the actions, particularly if you look at what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank, is of a politician that feels internal pressure, and a lot of what his actions are about staying in power and staying out of jail, to be frank. We can't ignore what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank, where there continues to be an illegal occupation and illegal expansion of settlements, the continued starvation of a population in Gaza. But neither can we forget that there remain hostages in Gaza that should be released and allowed to go back to their homes, and that the actions of Hamas on October the 7th were an absolute tragedy and an act of terror. And I think the frustrating thing looking at this from outside is so often when you look at the discussions and the debates about the Middle East, I sometimes look at some people on social media and I think they're approaching it as if they're trying to support their football team. So it's as if, because I'm on the side of these guys, everyone that is against them or everyone who opposes them, I have to automatically be against, or because that's my team, I have to support everything they do. The reality is many of the actions of the Israeli government are completely and utterly unacceptable. The actions of Hamas were completely and utterly unacceptable, and Iran having a nuclear weapon is completely and utterly unacceptable. And most common sense people across the country will agree with that.
Okay.
Can I just clarify then? Do you see, militarily, morally, ethically, do you see a difference between what Israel is doing in Gaza and what Israel is doing in Iran?
Well, of course, the hostilities have now stopped in Iran, which I think are the right thing to do. And I don't often vociferously agree with frustrations of President Trump, but I think people could see the frustrations of President Trump yesterday, where I think he saw that there were two sides who were trying to escalate a regional war, which would be not good for anybody. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the likes of the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iraq all stayed pretty quiet in those circumstances, because they recognise they'll be bitterly opposed to many of the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu, but they'll also be bitterly opposed to Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon.
I suppose that's what I'm getting. I mean, is it more supportable what they did in Iran than what they're doing? I mean, obviously it's not what they're doing in Gaza, but do you see it being different?
I think you have to make judgment calls based upon different things that are happening. My fear with the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu, though, is I do feel as if there's a sense he's out of control. And I think even the frustrations of Donald Trump yesterday was of a man who thinks perhaps this guy's out of control. And I think we have to look at all of his actions in the round and recognise that actually the people of Israel who rightly deserve to live in peace, freedom and security, just like the people of Palestine deserve to live in peace, freedom and security, are being let down by a leader of Israel who doesn't seem like he's a genuine partner for peace, doesn't believe in a two-state solution, and looks like he's more interested in prolonging his political career rather than getting a good solution for his population. And I think we should just be upfront and open about that.
Our conversation tonight is looking ahead to 2026, and just before we move off this topic altogether, I want to get a question from James, who is with us just over here. If we can get a microphone. Yeah, we'll get this microphone to James. James, thanks very much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Go for it.
The Scottish Government, especially under Humza Yousaf, but also under Mr Swinney, has taken a principled stance against Israel's actions in Gaza. That stance differs sharply from the UK Government and has given a voice to countless people throughout Scotland and the UK who feel that Keir Starmer and David Lammy do not speak for them on this issue. Wouldn't something precious be lost if Mr Sarwar wins the election and the new Scottish Government thereafter just parrots the UK Government line on Israel and Gaza? Would Mr Sarwar even accept that the Scottish Government should be speaking out in foreign affairs, or does he think small, like so many other Scottish Labour politicians before him, by insisting that devolved governments should get on with the day job and not concern themselves with reserved matters at all?
I suspect you've got a strong view on the independence question and the way that question is framed. Let's look at what happened in the Scottish Parliament. We were calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza in Scotland as a Scottish Labour Party before the Labour Party was in other parts of the UK. We supported a motion in the Scottish Parliament calling for an immediate ceasefire. And I have been calling out the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu and quite openly saying that he is flouting international law and that he is committing war crimes long before a UK Labour government was elected. I do think there is unfairness, though, in how you characterise the UK government's position, because the UK Labour government's position is fundamentally different from the position that was adopted by the last UK Tory government. We withdrew our block for the ICC. We withdrew our block for the ICJ. We restored funding to UNRWA, the humanitarian organisation that does the most work in Gaza. There are further restrictions on arms sales. There is the sanctioning of two Israeli ministers, and there is a more vociferous speaking out about the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think we've got to be open and honest about that. And also the UK didn't take part in the strikes back and forth that happened between Israel and Iran. So I just don't accept the frame in which you pose the question. Will we continue to speak on matters of foreign policy, of principal value? Of course we will, because I believe in my social justice values, and I don't believe they extend just to Scotland. I think they extend to the whole of the UK and the whole of the world. So I'll continue to express my view in the strongest possible terms, if that's what I think the right thing to do is.
I think James's question is an interesting one as we move to kind of Scottish/domestic issues as well, from these important and questions of huge gravity and huge significance now. We want to talk about welfare, particularly over the next few minutes. But actually, just before I get to that, we're coming up to a year of Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, next week, I think, if I've got my dates correct. In that year, what have you learned about how not to lead?
Very good question, Calum. I can see why you're a journalist. Look, I think the challenge you have, and look, we're going to have similar challenges. If we're successful next year, I'm not going to pretend that if we're successful next year, every decision is going to be easy or every decision is going to be popular, because we have got some big, massive structural challenges to confront in Scotland. Just like Keir Starmer and the UK Labour government have big, massive structural challenges to confront. They've got big ones around security that they didn't think probably would have been a big major feature of the early part of a Labour government, which clearly has become an early feature of a Labour government. They've got structural issues to confront around welfare. They've got structural issues to confront around their own NHS, and that's why you'll see the publication of a 10-year strategy in the coming days and weeks. We have got huge structural issues to confront in Scotland. We've got an NHS that is not performing in the way it should, where 40% of our population are having to pay privately to get their hip and knee replacements. We have to reform and fix our NHS. Some of that will be difficult, but we have to do it. We've got to fix our education and skills system, where right now we have a culture in Scotland that says university is success and everything else is either the championship, the first division, or the conference league. Apology for the football references. But we've got to fix our skills system. Our energy mix, something I know Geoff in particular is passionate about. we aren't getting the balance right in terms of our energy policy. I don't think we're getting a balance right in terms of oil and gas. I don't think we're getting the balance right in terms of renewal. I think we're making a mistake with the ideological block to new nuclear energy projects, for example, in Scotland, which is blocking billions of pounds of investment from coming into Scotland, thousands of jobs, and delivering energy security here. We've got a tax system that's fundamentally broken. We've got local government that's fundamentally broken. We don't do regional economic development in our country. We've got a quango system. Now we've got more public sector bodies than we have MSPs, where we've got layer after layer of bureaucracy and management and people to point fingers at and blame rather than government taking responsibility. And we've got a government that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but feels like it's doing less and less and less and less and less well. They are huge structural challenges. And the stark choice we're going to face next year is, do we carry on thinking our parliament is purely a parliament for protest, to talk about what's wrong about somewhere else in the UK, or do we think our parliament and our government is about getting results for people here in Scotland, regardless of what anyone's view is on the independence question? That's why I think our parliament's job is use the power we have, be a can-do country, a can-do parliament that defeats the politics of fear, blame, gives people hope, and does those big structural things our country needs to do. And that's what I'm desperate to do.
I had a whole different question lined up, and then something just said just sparked, so let's see if this works. Therein lies the kind of fundamental issue you face, though, and the challenge you face. I believe, as you just said, paraphrasing you, we're getting energy policy wrong right now. So how powerful will you be as First Minister to change that energy policy? And if I just may say, I do welcome your recent intervention on this. I don't want to get into too specific and niche subjects, but I just want people to understand why I'm so exercised about this. We've got a world-class industry up the road there that is being gutted just now, and it's heartbreaking to see colleagues actually fundamentally leaving overseas to work in much more carbon-heavy industries. But just this week, we had the latest national gas figures that published that said we relied year on year this year 18% more LNG, liquid natural gas, 4 times heavier than we produce domestically from the US. Very limited economic benefit in that. I know you now start to understand that position, Anas. My question back to you is, will Keir Starmer listen to you?
Well, let's look at some specifics. I supported GB Energy, something I know you support as well, Geoff. Still not a member yet, I'll have it. And we pushed for GB Energy to be headquartered in Scotland and headquartered in Aberdein because it was symbolic, but also that's where the skills future lies. Secondly, I've been pretty clear about, we made a commitment on honouring all oil and gas licences that were given before the election. In my mind, that includes Jackdaw and Rosebank. That's why we pushed very heavily on that, and you saw new guidance being issued last week. We will break the ideological block on nuclear energy, which will provide energy security for Scotland, billions of investment and those thousands of jobs. We did win some concessions around, so I support the windfall tax, let me just be clear about that, but we did win some concessions around allowances.
There's no windfall, Anas.
No, one second, if you let me finish, Geoff. But I do think that we still need further movement on the allowances because the challenge we have right now is even if we are to issue the licences for Jackdaw and Rosebank, there are fully licensed oil and gas fields which right now for many people don't feel like investable propositions. And we have to make them investable propositions in order to yield tax receipts for the Treasury, which will be a positive for the Treasury, as well as making sure we have greater energy security so we're not importing oil and gas and to the extent in which you say, to protect our jobs, as well as giving a fairer period around the transition and making sure that we are getting the investment we need to attract into our country. I don't think you would disagree with that.
No, I don't, but very quick follow-up. They're not investable because they're paying 78% tax. Now, no other industry in the Western world is paying 78% tax. Mark Carney's done a vote-fast on oil and gas. Canada, oil and gas is back on. Recognise it has to be an enabler of the transition. Norway are laughing at us. It only seems to be Keir Starmer that seems to be saying, no, we're holding on to this, guys, this policy, not just of a punitive tax, but trying to as much as possible, put blockades in the way of more domestic security. We've talked about geopolitical uncertainty just now, and we've heard the Prime Minister, and I agree with him, say that national security...
You can tell he's passionate about this.
National security is energy security. Energy security is domestic security.
Yep,
it's all
right.
the same thing. So surely it makes sense to produce more of ourselves domestically than rely on carbon-heavier imports from overseas. I just don't get it. It's absurd.
So absolutely, energy security is national security. So we were right to invest in our defence infrastructure in Scotland. In the UK, that's disproportionately going to benefit Scotland. You're right. We'll disagree on the percentages of the windfall tax, but I think you are right to say that there needs to be a look at the allowances to make it investable propositions, and there has to be genuine partnership. And the reason why fundamentally I think that is not just because of the jobs of today, not just because of the tax receipts that will come from that generation, but also if you are going to see the large-scale investments that need to happen in the renewable energy of the future, those that are currently operating in oil and gas need to make some of those large-scale investments, and we have to create an environment that allows them to make those large-scale investments. So I get the broader frustration, although we'll probably disagree on the intricacies.
I just want to, by the interest of balance, I do want to say, put on
record.
record, I think some of the stuff that the UK government's done on trying to accelerate offshore wind in particular is hugely welcome. So I do welcome that. In the interest of balance, I've always been too tough.
There's a bit of a theme, I think, in a lot of this, and it brings me back to welfare that I mentioned a moment ago. At the last check, which admittedly was, about an hour and a half ago, this could be wildly out of date by now, 12 MPs from Labour in Scotland, Scottish constituencies, if you see what I mean, signed this amendment that would potentially block the government's controversial changes to the benefits system. Do you back those Scottish MPs?
So look, my position has been quite consistent on the welfare reforms, which is I support the principle of reform. Mm-hmm. We do have to look at the structural challenges that exist in our welfare system, even with the changes currently being proposed. And I saw the Deputy Prime Minister just before I came in saying in an interview that discussions are ongoing around the specifics of the bill. Even with the changes that are being proposed, welfare spending will be going up over the course of this Parliament, not coming down. It's also important to note, and I think this is a fundamental Labour principle, that I believe work is the best route out of poverty. That's a fundamental Labour principle. But not everyone can work, and those that can't work should get the support that they deserve. There are many positives in this legislation. For example, the end to mandatory reassessments, particularly for those that have lifelong conditions, the £1 billion extra that goes into back-to-work schemes.
Sure, but it's things like personal independence payment that's
work.
controversial, isn't it?
And on the personal independence payment, I think it's important to make a distinction that personal independence payment is not a benefit that applies in Scotland.
Sure.
That is a benefit in England and Wales.
To bring you back
so
to my
the
question.
changes to PIP do not apply in Scotland. The changes to universal credit absolutely apply in Scotland. The changes to PIP don't apply in Scotland. But I think there are still conversations to be had around the welfare reform.
I think the point, the foundation of my question, though, is this real anxiety from Scottish representatives that this bill isn't suitable and they want to kill it. That's what this amendment would do. It would block the bill completely. And my question to you, as somebody who is trying to become the next First Minister of Scotland, is, do you agree with them?
Well, conversations are ongoing. As you
So you
would
don't
expect,
like the bill as it is?
As you would expect, people are legitimately raising their concerns, having those conversations, and as the Deputy Prime Minister said, those conversations will continue.
She said at Deputy Prime Minister's questions today, though, that the vote will be happening next week. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, said at NATO today he's pressing ahead with it. He doesn't seem to care about these rebellious MPs.
I think it's safe to say that there'll be ongoing conversations with the legislation.
So the bill's not going to look the same when the
and
vote
legitimate concerns should be addressed, but we should absolutely support the principle.
So you're
of
hearing
reform.
there's changes coming?
Look, I'm not party to the direct conversations that individual MPs are having in terms of the individual department, but the but here is that we have to support the principle of reform. What those reforms look like have to be balanced and have to be fair. And we will have big other structural challenges that we have to confront in Scotland too, and we should be open about having those conversations. But as you can imagine, it's a fast-moving situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a rebellion, and we're trying to work out if you support it or not. Go on, Andy.
So you've been on here for 20 minutes, not talked about any devolved issues. We got close with energy, but it's about half and half.
Yeah.
We talked about welfare, we talked about foreign policy.
We are moving
This
on.
is, unfortunately, the harsh reality of life for a unionist party in Scotland. I used to work for a wee one a few years ago.
How did you get on?
It was poor. It got weird. I'll be honest, it wasn't great. But
It got weird, did you say?
Yeah.
that's what happens. I mean, you have a situation where this time last year, you're neck. I mean, I know you won the election, but I mean, in terms of vote share, you're neck and neck with the SNP.
This time last year, Professor John Curtis was saying Labour will be lucky to get 10 to 12 seats.
And this time last month, Professor John Curtis said, "Don't get carried away with Hamilton.
He was right.
On your uniform swing, you lost 2%, and you're going to get 18 seats."
Even the good people of Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse would say it is not the demographic of wider Scotland.
Right. So, well, exactly. So not much has changed, is Sir John's message. Is not much has changed. And this is the problem, though. And the same thing happened not just to the Tories repeatedly every election for a number of years, but if you look back to Tavish Scott when he was Lib Dem leader, 2011, had 16 seats. He did nothing wrong, perfectly smart guy, competent leader, didn't put a foot wrong. But his party in London went into coalition with the Tories, and he went from 16 seats in going into 2011, and he got gutted down to 4. Nothing to do with him. So you've spent the last year doing nothing wrong, and yet you've lost, what, 10, 12, 13%?
Actually, just won a by-election.
So, but you won but
let me make a broader point, Andy.
So how do you get over these? How do you get over the fundamental to get to things like the NHS and education, things you want to talk about?
Let me answer the question. Is if you look at the fundamental mismatch that happened in terms of the national conversation, the national debate, and the media coverage during the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election, it was the most alien coverage of a campaign to what was the reality on the ground. And I think the big thing that the commentators continue to misunderstand is I'm not pretending that everyone thinks that every action taken by UK Labour government has been a popular one. I think it's safe to say, as a former dentist, there's been teething problems. Right? So I think everyone would accept that. But I think the big thing that you are miscalculating, and people are miscalculating, is the level of disappointment and anger with an SNP government that's been in power for 18 years.
And you still beat by 800 votes in a by-election.
1 second, if you like.
4 terms, 800 votes.
If you let me finish. Well, some people predicted we were going to come third, actually. So we did beat them in the by-election. But the big point there is that I think people still are thinking about politics and thinking about the framing of the politics in the context of a UK election. And I think that's part of the miscalculation that the commentators, the pundits and the pollsters are making, as well as the bookies, is right now all the debate is in the context of a right and wrong of a UK Labour government. And I honestly believe there will be a point that comes in the campaign between now and the election next year where people realise that they're not just voting against something, they're actually voting to choose something. And I think when they get that choice, as the people of Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse did, they will choose taking a different direction. And the challenge we had, if you just let me finish the point, Calum, sorry. The challenge we had in the by-election was, one, the national coverage was alien from the public. I don't think the national coverage can make that mistake come the election, and partly they won't be allowed to. Secondly, if I'm being blunt about it, John Swinney ran a pretty shameful campaign where he said he actually actively tried to push people into the hands of reform. Some of that worked, but it didn't work to the extent that they wanted. That's not going to fly for them next year, and we will be able to pose a choice directly to people that the election next year is going to be a choice of a third decade of the SNP in power with John Swinney as First Minister, or a new direction for Scotland with a Scottish Labour government as me as First Minister. That is the debate we're going to have. Keir Starmer's not standing to be First Minister. You can't change the UK Labour government next year, but you can choose who the First Minister is, and you can change the Scottish government. And I honestly believe, despite the commentators' obsession about talking about something else elsewhere,
people keep saying I'm
I
obsessed.
genuinely believe that the voters will choose that different direction in Scotland.
Can I just say, I think there's something really intriguing you've raised there, and I think there's something in this, potentially, with one caveat, which I'll come to. So in 2007, the SNP won their first ever election. And then in 2010, it went back to a Westminster election. Labour hammered the SNP, returned pretty much. I think was that not the status quo election where all the MPs stayed the same?
41 seats. Yeah.
And Scottish Labour made the mistake of thinking problem solved.
And what Scottish Labour did at that time was they fought a Westminster campaign against the Tories. We couldn't believe our luck in 2011 going, you are not even talking about this is brilliant. And we went and won a majority. Now that's a very much oversimplification because our campaign led by a wonderful Chief of Staff was wonderful, but there is something in that, I think, actually. And once people change their framing and their mindset, the public, they may do it. There's one caveat and one unknown. The rise of reform. They're a totally untested, quantity in that respect, in a Scottish context particularly, because they don't have a record to defend. So how do you compete, take them on? Because there was 1,400 votes between first and third, a genuine three-way tie.
So it's interesting.
So how do you counter that threat, knowing that you can't attack their record in government because they don't have one?
No, good question. And again, I can go by the conversation I was having with reform voters in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehenge. I'm not going to say that that's reflective of everybody. But if you look at what happened there was a pretty en masse block and transfer of people that were traditional Tories that went to reform. That was one part. There was a second part where people who were genuinely frustrated with both governments chose it as a protest vote. In a by-election, it's easier to choose a protest vote and therefore voted for reform. There was a third block that believed that it was a straight choice between reform and the SNP, so we're voting reform because they wanted to get rid of the SNP. And I think our challenge is going to be next year. And actually, I think this challenge is even bigger than people talking about a Westminster government all the time, or people talking about Keir Starmer, or people talking about the SNP record. I genuinely believe the single biggest challenge facing the Scottish Labour Party in the election next year is how we counter the politics of hopelessness.
Hopelessness, did you say?
Yes, hopelessness. Because
John Swinney said people need hope as well. Or?
well, I mean, he's had a chance to give some in the last 18 years and patently failed, to be honest with you. But genuinely, if you look at that is, for me, I think, the biggest risk of the election next year, where people just believe no matter what politicians say, no matter which party's in power, nothing's ever going to get better. The economy ain't ever going to improve. Our prospects aren't going to improve. The NHS isn't going to get better. No one can ever fix it. It's that broken. Schools are never going to work. And therefore, out of a sense of hopelessness, they are pushed into the arms of divisive figures like Nigel Farage and Reform. And I think the lesson for us as a left-of-centre party here in Scotland, and actually it's a lesson that we've got to learn from the Democrats, is if we focus purely on talking about the personalities or talking about that party and talking about whether it's racist adverts or whether it's something else, we risk giving the wrong message to those people, and it further entrenches them to go to that route of hopelessness.
I'm just going to say,
we have got to demonstrate to those people we can improve their lives. And if we do that, that's how we win them back. That's a lesson the UK Labour Party has to learn, not just the Scottish Labour Party has to learn.
Just as a note, I imagine some people in here need the loo. We're already running a few minutes late, so we're going to punch things
Very
up.
briefly,
Let's
this is
go.
where I thought Geoff was going with 2010, but you obviously don't read my Herald columns every Friday.
Absolutely not.
Subscriptions available, affordable.
He watches the video summaries of them, though, Andy.
There you go.
As a sidebar to that, Andy usually sends us them in the WhatsApp group.
I do.
Jeff,
I never get the blue
and he
ticks.
still- and he still ignores them, doesn't he?
He's still on double grey ticks.
There are lessons from 2010, but I think the lessons from previous UK elections vis-à-vis Scottish elections is that at UK elections, people are voting in Scotland to get rid of the Tories or to stop the Tories. That's what happened in 2010. That's what happened last year as well. The problem is, at Scottish elections, history tells us that they're not voting to do that. They're voting to say who's best for Scotland, who's going to stand up for Scotland. And I think that's the trick for you for next year, is to prove to people that a unionist party is the answer to the question of who's going to stand up for Scotland, because they haven't believed it so far.
So interesting.
For the SNP keep winning.
Again, from Professor Sir John's comments earlier on, I think we did touch the sweet spot, actually, of the election last year, where we were getting voters who wanted to get rid of the Tories, but also getting voters who wanted to send a message and get rid of the SNP. And again, I think the big miscalculation that was made on the ground in terms of Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse was the extent to which people wanted to get rid of the SNP. See, for all the talk that people have talked about the divisiveness on reform, one of the very first questions we asked when we did the first round on the doors in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse is if there's one party you would definitely not vote for above any other. And the one that came out on top by a country mile was the SNP. People are misunderstanding the extent of the frustration and the anger with an SNP government that they feel has let them down, had their way. And let's not pretend they've got everything wrong in government. I'm not going to sit here and say everything the SNP done in the last 18 years has been wrong, because if that had been the case, they wouldn't have won election after election. And I'm always been one of the leaders that believes that the voters were right and we were wrong. That's why we had to fundamentally change.
Okay.
And that's the approach we're going to take in terms of those that are sympathetic to independence as well.
I hear you.
Next year is, even if you disagree with me on the final destination for Scotland, I think the vast majority of us can agree that the Scottish government's not working right now. We need to take a different direction.
Oh, you've just opened up. I wasn't going to say anything, but okay. I do. But so I respect.
I can go all night if you like. I don't mind.
No. Because I respect what you've said previously to actually, and you've said it a number of times, reaching out, and I do believe you in that respect. It's absolutely genuine in terms of independent supporters. But therefore, the comments of Douglas Alexander, your UK ministerial colleague at the weekend, when he said, basically, wasn't really a way out for Scotland should they choose democratically to do that. Now, if you're going to take some of the independent supporters with you, what is the route out for Scotland? How do you get a referendum? Or how will independence be decided if there is a pro-independence
So I'm going to
majority?
flip it back to your tactical genius, Geoff, which is, if I had said to you back in 2007 and 2011, when the SNP, first of all, won for the first time and then won a majority, that how are you ever possibly going to persuade someone that wants Scotland to stay in the UK to vote for you? If you had accepted the premise of that question, Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon would not have won those two elections, because they were able to persuade people who fundamentally disagreed with them on the premise of what they thought the destination for Scotland was, but they were able to persuade them because they persuaded people that we needed to try something different and that they had a plan to improve things despite what people's view of the Constitution might be. And I'm making the exact same argument, is even if you disagree with me on independence, I don't support independence, I don't support a referendum, I'm being really open and upfront about that. But do you think this is the best our NHS can run in Scotland? No, it's not. Do you think this is the best we can do to improve our skills system? No,
It's not answering my question. What is the route?
Well, it's up to the Scottish people to decide, and there has to be the settled will of Scotland. That's what the SNP...
Decide in what?
That's what the SNP had said before. I genuinely don't believe that people are thinking it's an independence election next year.
But that's not
independent supporters will.
No, some independent supporters will. And again, Sir John will, I'm sure, confirm at least partially this.
If we ever get him on stage.
If you look, if you look at how the SNP is polling compared to independence is polling, there are people who are voting for the Labour Party despite saying they would vote independence if another referendum came. Why is that? One, because they don't think a referendum is imminent. And secondly, they don't think the Scottish Government is performing well. And third, partly they wanted to get rid of the Tories, but partly they want things to change here in Scotland. And I believe that I can persuade people that we can make things work. So regardless of where we end up in the final destination, we have made Scotland stronger in the process. And that means Scotland ends up being independent in the future. That's a matter for people in Scotland. But at least we'll have improved things for the people of Scotland in the here and now.
It is very characteristic for this live podcast to run late. That is what we're doing, but we've got about 5 minutes left with an Ask Sarwar, and I want to take a question from Mark, who is with us somewhere. Mark, make yourself known. Oh, he's over here. Sorry, Mark. Hello. And by the way, Mark submitted a compliment too. Can you believe it? Mark's been a listener since week 1. Holyrood Sources is still #1 amongst the ever-growing list of copycat and wannabe political pods. Yeah, the rest is boring. Am I right? Go for it, Mark. What's your question?
Anas, if you become First Minister next May, will you pledge to review the Scottish system of income tax and bring it back into line with England and Wales, and consequently stop Scottish companies having to pay over the odds to recruit and retain top talent?
Again, big structural issue, and this is the structural challenges we're going to face. I think we are using income tax as a substitute for economic growth right now. And I think we have got the balance wrong, where a government wants to pretend that those that earn just over £30,000 somehow have the broadest shoulders in Scotland and therefore should pay higher taxes in Scotland. I don't think that's the right thing to do. We will not increase income tax if we elect a Scottish Labour government, and our ambition will be to cut tax and cut the tax burden in Scotland. The reason why I won't give a straight answer on equalising the tax bands, though, is I think... No, it's because there are unintended consequences of that. And the unintended consequences, if we go for an automatic equalisation of the tax bands, is we will, and well, we would inadvertently, but it would very deliberately if that's what we did, you would be marginally increasing tax for the lowest incomes, but cutting tax for the highest incomes. That would be the wrong approach for us to take. But there are quirks in the system that we have to resolve, particularly for those on the median wage, and we do have to reduce the tax burden overall. So that requires a whole system review, and we will do that, absolutely commit to that. We will not increase income tax, and we will look to cut it over the course of the Parliament. But that also relies on partnership with business to drive growth, so we can use the fruits of that growth, not just to reform our public services, but to reduce that tax burden in Scotland.
To cut it to the same level as the rest of the UK, or to potentially go lower than the rest of the UK? Because if you accept the argument that having higher taxes, particularly at the top end, is causing behavioural change and potentially stifling economic growth, you presumably would accept the argument that by undercutting England, you might actually stimulate growth, encourage more people here, and actually make yourself more competitive than England. I mean,
we would have to simplify it first, because right now I think we've got 7 bands compared to 3 or 4. We'd have to simplify it. We would have to correct, making sure we didn't have the unintended consequences where we gave a tax increase to the lowest incomes and a tax cut to the highest. But on principle, as close as we can get to the position in other parts of the UK so we don't have a competitive disadvantage, I see it.
But on principle, having a lower level than the rest of the UK.
If the maths add up, we'll have a look at that as part of our whole system review.
Do you think there's room to get a competitive advantage rather than to not be in a situation where there's a competitive disadvantage, if you take my drift?
So I think we can get a competitive advantage in our planning system if we reform it.
Okay.
Right now we have a
on
competitive
tax?
disadvantage. On tax, we have to do the whole system review. I'm not going to sit here and design a new tax system in front of you right now when
That's been
we've
fun.
got to
We'd
look at getting the balance right of the tax receipts.
Okay.
But are there areas where I think we can find advantages for businesses to come here? On rates, yes. On planning, yes. On how we use, for example, our capital money, our pension fund money, absolutely. We should be maximising people coming here to make this their home, to invest here, to start businesses here. And I think we've got to make that change.
Let us conclude with Anna Sarwar, with Ruth's question from earlier. Ruth, if you don't mind, I'll just repeat it at this point because we put it to Mr. Swinney.
Yep.
It was a question that Ruth submitted for both of you. Under what circumstances would you consider an SNP Labour coalition or confidence and supply agreement?
Look, the realpolitik is it's not going to happen. And we should just be open and honest about that. I mean, Andy comes up with some mad theories on the podcast, but that has to be up there with some of the maddest.
They would have said that in Ireland 7 or 8 years ago, wouldn't they?
And there's a but here, is where I think there is an opportunity. Is so we are going to have a parliament of minorities come the next election. The system was originally designed for that, the SNP, obviously, with Andy's fantastic stewardship. Sorry, Jeff's. Sorry, Andy. With Jeff's. Sorry, Andy. Sorry, Andy.
Easy
With
mistake.
Jeff's.
I've never been anywhere near government, to be
managed to break that system. But we will be looking to have a minority Labour government. And, of course, with any minority government, you will have to find areas of consensus to make improvements in Scotland. And I hope, and I genuinely hold out this hope, and given how bitter politics feels right now and how bitter our global politics feels right now, people might look at that and think there's a naive hope, but I genuinely believe that if we get a change of government next year and we are in a parliament of minorities, this will partly be dependent on leadership of individual political parties, and it's for Geoff and his colleagues to speculate on who the next leader of the SNP is. But depending on the leaderships and how people choose to act after there's been a change of government, touch wood, in Scotland, I genuinely believe that there will be a scope and an appetite to get things done in our country rather than just frustrate, because that will turn off people even more. And there is so much for us to do in that parliament, and so much for us to do in this country, and so much that actually we can agree on. But right now, politics is holding that back, and a lack of ambition, I fear, from government is holding us back. I want to break that impasse, but that only comes if we make that choice next year.
You've just conceded you won't win a majority.
I mean, I've proven pollsters wrong before. I'll hope to prove them wrong again. But even I don't think Sir John would get it that wrong, that we somehow would end up with a majority Labour government. I think that is probably an ambition too far, Calum. Okay. I think we will be a parliament of minorities, and I hope we're forming as I say, a minority Labour government in that situation.
It's lovely to see you.
My pleasure.
And
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you very much. See you soon. All the best.